will raise their hands, unmute, and then speak. Okay, Shamal Saab, go ahead.
So, good evening, everyone. I, from the Lucknow Ophthalmology Society, would like to invite everyone for this glaucoma session. And for today's session, our chairpersons are Dr. Manjula ma'am and Dr. Alpana Lele ma'am, and Dr. Jimmy will be the moderator. And panelists are Dr. S.K. Bhargav sir from King George Medical College University, Dr. Shobhana Dubey, and Dr. Vaibhav Jain from SGPGI. And the speakers are Dr. Shalini Mohan from GSM Medical College Kanpur, Dr. Monica Gupta from Lucknow, and Dr. Shakun Gupta from Indira Gandhi Eye Hospital, and Dr. Rajat Mohan also from King George Medical College. Few words I would like to say before starting the session about Dr. Jimmy Mittal, who is our moderator. She has done her MBBS from Himalayan Institute of Medical Sciences, Dehradun, and completed her MS from King George Medical College, Lucknow in 2007. After that, she did her short-term fellowship from glaucoma and NTA segment from Arvind Eye Hospital, Madurai, and then joined Indira Gandhi Eye Hospital, Amethi, and then Lucknow. Now she is presently working as a senior consultant at Vivekanand Polyclinic, and she is in charge of all the academics going there for DNB students and optometry students. Now I would like to request Dr. Jimmy Mittal to introduce our speakers. Over to you, Dr. Jimmy.
Okay, thank you for the hello. Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, sir, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to moderate this beautiful session. And here I would like to take the privilege of inviting our first speaker, Dr. Shalini Mohan ma'am. She has been a good mentor for me and a senior for me as well. So a brief introduction about her. She has done her MS from GSVM Medical College, followed by senior residency in cornea and glaucoma from AIIMS, New Delhi. She also worked as a consultant at Gangaram Hospital in New Delhi before joining the GSVM Medical College. She is presently Associate Professor and heading the Eye Bank, Glaucoma and Cornea Services at GSVM Medical College. She is Central Zone Representative of the Glaucoma Society of India and editor of the UP Journal of Ophthalmology. She has 83 publications to her credit, and she has authored 23 chapters in various textbooks and has 253 citations to her credit. She has presented more than 400 research papers in various national and international conferences. So we are privileged to have you here, ma'am, and I would request you to begin with your talk. Shalini ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jimmy, for your kind words, and I am very, very thankful to Lucknow Ophthalmic Society, Dr. Rajesh Sahai, Dr. Jimmy, for this wonderful opportunity. And Lucknow is actually a home kind of thing for me. My brother is also staying over there, so it is good to be amongst Lucknowites. And today, so I'm going to discuss a different kind of situation where we tend to get many of the patients which are actually dealing with variety of systemic disorders. Now, glaucoma is simultaneously associated with all these patients, and then they are also taking variety of different medications which can interact with our anti-glaucoma medications. So we are talking about these systemic ailments which can be there in our patients, and there can be other medications also. So now I will be presenting in the form of 4 case scenarios and then discussing them one by one. Now, this was a 50-year-old female who was diagnosed with glaucoma 1 year ago elsewhere. Her IOP was normal with lateral frost, both the eyes. And when we saw past ocular history, there was no previous history of any trauma. And she was hypertensive on medication, and there was no family history of glaucoma. But what was the issue with this one lady was that there was a defect in the visual field in left eye, which had appeared despite a controlled intraocular pressure. So we examined the lady in detail, and we found that visual acuity was normal, 6/6, and anterior segment examination was not remarkable. Gonioscopy showed open angles, and central corneal thickness was normal. Now, when we did a diurnal curve, there was a 12 to 18 millimeter of diurnal variation in left eye and 14 to 20 in right eye. And there was a peak at 10 a.m., but that was within normal limits only. So we examined the disc also. The right eye showed a superior notch. In left eye, we had both superior and inferior notch. And when we saw the visual field, the pattern deviation plot definitely showed an inferior arcuate scotoma. So the thing was that despite the controlled intraocular pressure, why this lady progressed and why the scotoma appeared. So OCT was also there, although not relevant in this scenario. So we thought what course of action we should follow and what we should ask in this particular lady in history. So we started asking about retrospective history of snoring, because we know that glaucoma has been associated, progression is associated with obstructive sleep apnea. We did a 24-hour blood pressure monitoring. Now, in this monitoring, what we found was that we noted that she was hypertensive and she was on antihypertensive medication. So nocturnal hypotension was seen, and the systolic blood pressure ranged from 70 to 125 and diastolic range from 56 to 85. And there was a significant dip in the blood pressure around 4 a.m. in the morning. And we know that nocturnal hypertension increases glaucoma progression because of the poor diastolic perfusion pressure, resulting into decreased ocular blood flow. So this is already documented in many of the studies and many of the trials. So we realized that this might be one of the issue, and that is why we consulted her internist and asked the consultant to modify her antihypertensive medication, which was modified, and then the patient remained stable for up till 3 years of follow-up. So this was just a case to highlight that many a times our patients are having variety of systemic disorders. They might be using different type of medications, but many a times some of those medications might not be patient might not be taking at appropriate timings, or the medication themselves might be interacting with anti-glaucoma medication and resulting into a different kind of issues with that particular patient. So this was a very nice study published in Survey of Ophthalmology, which showed that there are a variety of systemic disorders which are present in our glaucoma patients. They can be systemic hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, diabetes, cardiac disease, and dysthyroid state. And then there are a variety of medications which patients might be using, of which most common medications are antihypertensive, antiplatelets, antihyperlipidemic, and hypoglycemic agents, followed by psychiatric medications. So these are the common medications which glaucoma patients might be using regularly. So whenever it is about blood pressure, we know that hypertension has been associated with the progression of glaucoma. Now, nocturnal reduction and obstructive sleep apnea, I have already mentioned. Now, this was a Baltimore Eye Survey and Egna-Umack study which found an inverse relationship between diastolic perfusion pressure and progression of glaucoma. So the critical value of diastolic perfusion pressure, which has been reported, is 50 to 70 millimeters of mercury, and below which, if the blood pressure dips, then it might lead to progression of glaucoma, which might be dramatic also, and sudden appearance of defect might there be also. So we need to take this point in consideration whenever we are treating our glaucoma patients. Now, this was about antihypertensives. Now, there are so many patients who are on antihypertensive. The important thing to this is that whenever patients are on systemic beta blockers, the effect of topical beta blockers might not be complete. So suppose you assume that beta blockers are reducing the intraocular pressure by 30% from the baseline. And when you add a beta blocker, you're not getting the response. So we must check if patient is using any systemic beta blocker, and if it is using, better to shift to another group of anti-glaucoma drugs. Now, another thing is that if patient is simultaneously using systemic and topical beta blocker, which is non-selective, that may produce an additive cardio-inhibitory effect, and this is important in the cases of cardiac patients. Then there are so many patients who are on thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics. Now, what they do, they might shift the RS lens diaphragm anteriorly. So this is of significance in the patients who are having shallow anterior chamber. Suppose you are having a patient who is having shallow anterior chamber and he is on diuretic, then we need to be careful with our gonioscopy in this particular subset of patients. Another thing is that whenever diuresis is being induced in these hypertensive patients, and he is already using oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, both can lead to electrolyte imbalance. And again, patient can fall sick, especially if he is a elderly patient. So we need to be careful in this particular scenario. Now, regarding calcium channel blockers, we do understand, especially the peripheral calcium channel blockers, they are good with regards to increasing ocular blood flow. So if they are being prescribed to our glaucoma patients, they are good drugs to be prescribed, and we can request the physician colleague to go for the calcium channel blocker in case the patient is already a hypertensive patient. So this was about hypertension. Now patients might be on cardiac drugs also. So suppose patient is already using aspirin, which is a very commonly used drug. Again, aspirin can lead to anterior displacement of iris lens diaphragm. It can lead to massive choroidal hemorrhage and exudative ARMD. So already if patient is on aspirin, and these findings, if you find in a patient, try to focus on stopping the aspirin and then again examining your patient. Now, there is a case report of a nanophthalmic patient who developed bilateral acute angular closure glaucoma with warfarin. Although warfarin, we are not using that commonly nowadays. Similarly, if patient is on digoxin, which is the cardiac glycoside, they may interfere by binding of digoxin, beta blocker especially, and they can increase the blood concentration, leading to digitoxin toxicity, which can be there. So if suppose patient is using digoxin, you have to be careful. Now with diabetes, we know that the association with glaucoma is well known, and it is known fact that the patients who are diabetics, they might be having more incidence of glaucoma than non-diabetic population. But the risk is, the thing is that in diabetics, especially with oral hypoglycemic agents, there is no significant association with or interaction with anti-glaucoma medication. But these patients, they might develop neovascular glaucoma, and so we have to be careful. Another important thing is, suppose there is sudden rise in intraocular pressure, we avoid giving glycerol, and this fact is known to everyone. Now, one thing I would like to emphasize that the diabetics who are on insulin, now suppose they are using adrenergic agonist, that decreases the effect of insulin. So what we can do, we can advise the patients to do a punctal occlusion so that the systemic absorption of drug is reduced, and that doesn't affect their high glycemic levels. Similarly, systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can again lead to electrolyte imbalance in these patients. So if you are giving for a short term, it is all right. But if you are planning to give for a long term period, you need to be slightly more careful. So now coming to another case scenario. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now coming to another case scenario of a 22-year-old female. She was using spectacles for past 12 years. Everything was perfectly all right. And suddenly she had headache. She had loss of vision with nausea and vomiting, and she came to us. So on examination, what we found, that the vision was hand movement in both the eyes. She was severely photophobic, unable to open her eyes. So we did a slit lamp examination. There was bilateral circumcorneal congestion. There was significant corneal edema in both the eyes, and there was extremely almost flat anterior chamber with mid-dilated pupil. So obviously the diagnosis was very, very clear. It was bilateral acute angular closure glaucoma and intraocular pressure. In fact, she was not allowing to measure the intraocular pressure. It was 43 and 48 millimeters in both the eyes. So this was a girl who was myopic with deep anterior chamber, and following a headache, she had this kind of picture. So diagnosis was bilateral acute angular closure glaucoma. And there was one very significant history. When we asked the retrospective history, she told that for headache, she was diagnosed as a case of migraine. 48 hours she took topiramate, and that resulted into this kind of situation. So we are very well familiar that certain groups of drugs, they can lead to bilateral acute angle closure glaucoma. And we have to be very, very careful about all these drugs which are commonly prescribed and commonly taken by over-the-counter prescription, and they might lead to this kind of situation. So young patient with headache can take these medication, and not just with headache. Sometimes there are so many antipsychotic drugs. There are tricyclic antidepressant like amitriptyline, which is commonly taken and might lead to this kind of condition. And then there are SSRIs like paroxetine, etc., which are being taken. And then sedatives like diazepam are commonly taken by many of the patients, antihistaminics, anti-Parkinsonism, and whole of these group of drugs, they can lead to this particular situation. So what can we do? Now, UBM is diagnostic in this case, and it actually shows, you can see that there is the hypoechoic area just above the ciliary body. So say there is a bilateral supraciliary effusion on UBM. You can also do actually ultrasound, and you can see that there is a shallow choroidal detachment in both the eyes in ultrasonic pictures. So these things you can do to confirm the diagnosis. So how do you manage these patients? You need to stop the drug. We add anti-glaucoma medication, and along with anti-glaucoma medication, it is important to give topical steroids to these individuals along with cycloplegics. This actually gives a dramatic response, but never go for a laser iridotomy in this scenario, because I've seen that these girls are subjected to laser iridotomy. Actually, that doesn't help, because the etiology is not the iris which is leading to acute angle closure, but it is the ciliary effusion which is causing acute angle closure glaucoma. Now coming to another case scenario of a 55-year-old male patient who was under treatment for glaucoma for last 5 years on 3 anti-glaucoma medication. He was doing very well, and suddenly one day he was referred to us when he had progression on visual fields. So on examination, IOP was perfectly all right. Gonioscopy showed wide open angle, but this showed significant defects in both the eyes. Glaucomatous defect very clear cut, along with RNFL defects. So this was a clear cut case of glaucoma. So what we did, we reviewed the various visual fields which were available with the patient. This was the right eye. And his visual fields, he had 3 visual fields which were almost 1 year apart. So this showed a superior heavy field defect which was progressing to inferior arcuate scotoma. And then in third field, this was leading to advanced visual field defect. When we examined the left eye of the patient, it was perfectly all right. In second field, we can see few of the depressed spots in the lower part of the visual field leading to paracentral scotoma, and then there was a clear-cut arcuate scotoma in the inferior part of the visual field. So there was definite progression, despite that intraocular pressure was very well under control through 5 years of time. So we did a diurnal control. It was also more or less normal, no significant finding. So we thought that obviously we are missing something which is leading to progression in this particular scenario. We again started asking him retrospective history. He was diabetic, on medication, nothing related to progression. So we thought there might be any history of steroid usage. So we asked history of dermatological illness, we asked history of bronchial asthma, but nothing conclusive we could get. So we inquired about his occupation. So what we found was that he was actually a priest in temple. और priest ये जब भी आरती होती थी morning और evening में, he used to blow the conch shell. शंख लगातार बजाते थे during chanting of आरती. So prolonged conch shell blowing during the aarti, that actually clicked to our mind that if this is leading to some problem, so we reviewed the literature. And what we found was that this was a very interesting study in trumpet players. When they used to blow the trumpet, the pulsatile ocular blood flow used to fell down, and that actually led to a progression of the visual field. So we thought, let's do the Valsalva in this particular case. And what we found that there was a rise in intraocular pressure from 14 to 18 millimeters of mercury and from 12 to 18 millimeters of mercury while doing Valsalva maneuver. So we did an ocular blood flow. We have a color Doppler machine. So we are doing it regularly. So we did it in this patient also. Now what you can see that when the patient was doing Valsalva, his peak systolic velocity was 7.48. And as he released, see the peak systolic velocity shot to 12.3 centimeters per second. And this was happening in all arteries, not just central retinal artery. This was happening with ophthalmic artery also, with short posterior ciliary artery. In every artery, this was happening. Here also you can see that with the Valsalva, it was only 11.5, and that increased to 19 when Valsalva was released. So we understood that this was the Valsalva, which might happen with variety of yogasanas, with variety of blowing of instrument, with excessive straining while lifting weight. This can happen, and this Valsalva maneuver which was happening was leading to progression of glaucoma. So we requested the priest to give his conch shell to one of his assistants and just to pray with the other things rather than blowing the conch shell. So these are very few things which we can modify, we can change, we can, by changing lifestyle, we can suggest to our patient, and therefore we can prevent the progression of glaucoma. Now coming to last patient, last case scenario, and this is the in fact second part of my talk, which is related to pregnancy. This was a young lady, 29-year-old female, and was following with us. She was already a mother of two child. In right eye, she underwent some surgery, following which she had some infection. She could not give the exact history, but her eye was hysical, left eye, sorry. In right eye, she underwent VR surgery for her post-myopic retinal detachment, following which she developed secondary glaucoma. So she was maintaining good control of pressures on 2 anti-glaucoma medication. Then suddenly she came to me and declared that I have left all anti-glaucoma medication because I am pregnant now. So this was a kind of tricky situation for me, that now she is already pregnant, we cannot do anything for her. And that actually led to be more careful with our patients who are young ladies who are in childbearing age, that we need to be more careful, and we need to inform them that whenever they are planning, they must inform to us so that we can manage their glaucoma before the onset of pregnancy. So these women, they have, we know that women have significantly lower incidence of primary open angle glaucoma, not about primary angle closure glaucoma, which is almost equal in females. But open angle glaucoma is definitely less in females because of the protective hormone, which is the estrogen. Now, during pregnancy, in fact, the IOP decreases in women because of the variety of other hormones which are building up, like beta human chorionic HCG, beta human chorionic gonadotropin hormone, similarly relaxing and increasing. And as these hormones, they increase from first trimester to third trimester of pregnancy, the IOP tends to decrease. Now, and therefore, it is a kind of protective for the women who are going for pregnancy. If they are already a glaucomatous patient, their intraocular pressure is decreasing. So it is a kind of protection to them. So, but the thing is that because now we have delayed marriages, we have delayed conception, and moreover, the reproductive technology has grown up so much that actually they can lead to a pregnancy in later age of life. And then there can be pre-existing glaucoma, which actually originally commenced in childhood, and patients are following with us. And there are another subset of patients who are of secondary glaucoma, secondary to other diseases. And then there are newer diagnostic avenues. Moreover, now because our glaucoma specialists have become so proficient, they can diagnose glaucoma very early also. So there is sudden upsurge in diagnosis of glaucoma in young females. And because we are concerned, because all the anti-glaucoma medication, they reach the bloodstream, they cross the placenta, and they can reach to fetal circulation, leading to exposure of these anti-glaucoma medications. And all these anti-glaucoma medication, they actually carry the risk of teratogenicity. They interfere with establishment of pregnancy, and they do cause side effect to neonates. Now, The problem with us is that there are no randomized controlled trials. And we cannot have randomized controlled trials also, because once their ethical issues definitely will crop up. We cannot subject to these females to these trials. So that is why there is so much of problem. So our goal is to treat and control the glaucomatous disease before the pregnancy occurs. So what can we do when before conception has happened? If patient is of glaucoma suspect or early glaucoma, then we can easily discontinue all anti-glaucoma medication and we can monitor our patients. If patient is of mild to moderate glaucoma, we can perform a selective laser trabeculoplasty. And another thing which has come up now is micropulse laser, which is a safe modality and in fact reduces the intraocular pressure in glaucoma patients very well. Especially it has very good effect in primary glaucoma. So if you are using in primary glaucoma, definitely patient will successfully pass on the stage of whole pregnancy and during lactation with controlled intraocular pressure. And in advanced glaucoma, what we can do is that we can do glaucoma surgery before conception, or if suppose a patient has come to us who is already pregnant, then second trimester is the safest time when we can do the surgery in these patients. So this is a chart of FDA which puts the various category of drugs which can be used in pregnancy. Category A is the drug which is safest. That is, it has not shown any risk neither to animal studies nor in human studies. Category B are the drugs which have shown risk in the animal studies, but there are no adequate human studies to say that these groups of drugs are risk for humans. Now, when we see this chart of drugs which can be used during pregnancy, no drug falls in category A. So, no drug is absolutely safe in pregnancy. Now, brimonidine is the drug which it falls in category B and can be used in some part of the pregnancy, except in third trimester. But with some cautiousness, we can use brimonidine. All other groups of drug, they fall in category C. So whenever we are dealing these pregnant ladies who need medical management, we cannot give any drug in first trimester of pregnancy. So either we stop the drugs, or if suppose patient is of advanced glaucoma, we can do some laser procedure. They are safer than doing any other things. Second trimester is the time when we can add brimonidine with safety, but it has to be withdrawn during third trimester because we know that it leads to depression of respiratory depression in infants, and therefore during third trimester we have to discontinue brimonidine. But during third trimester, as organogenesis has already almost completing, so we can add beta blockers and topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can be given. Moreover, beta blockers are being given to control hypertension during pregnancy by our gynecologist friend. So again, this is a bit safe drug if you want to add something during third trimester of pregnancy. Now, other medications like prostaglandin analogs, they have to be avoided. Now, although very small amount of prostaglandin is being used, but they might cause uterine contraction and might precipitate the miscarriage, although there are no such reports. So in very advanced glaucoma, people have actually tried it also with punctal occlusion and they say it is safe. But as of now, there are no recommendation to use these prostaglandin analogs. Again, pilocarpine cannot be used due to the hyperthermia which it produces, due to the restlessness it can give. Then oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitors have to be stopped, but topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can be continued during pregnancy. Well, we have Rho kinase inhibitors also coming up, but as such data are not available on these class of drugs. Now, whenever there is a lactating female, we can give prostaglandin analogs, which is safest during medication. It doesn't have any systemic side effects. And now, because pregnancy is also over, so we don't fear any uterine contraction, etc. So prostaglandin analogs. And the second drug which can be added very safely is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, except in case of metabolic acidosis. Then beta blockers have to be avoided. Brimonidine is absolutely contraindicated because of respiratory depression in neonates. But punctal occlusion or nasolacrimal duct occlusion is must with all the anti-glaucoma medications during pregnancy. So glaucoma surgery, I said, can be done during second trimester of pregnancy. So to summarize, I would say that we have to be careful and cautious because we want to give a holistic approach to our patients, not because just we are glaucoma specialists, we are not just dealing with glaucoma, but we have to pay attention to all the systemic issues and all the medications which patient is using. Then sometimes glaucoma might progress with normal intraocular pressures also. So we have to pay attention to other associative factors, which might be sleep apnea, which might be vasospasm, which might be hypertension. We need to be careful about that also. Sometimes we need to do other ancillary tests to confirm the diagnosis of progression, which we should do whenever required. Timing and duration of taking any of the medication is also very, very important for all our patients, and we should pay attention to that also. Now, concomitant medications should be avoided. If there is interaction, we should be avoided because we don't want to increase the side effects of the medication. Valsalva maneuver is a thing which needs to be avoided in all glaucoma patients, and this should be emphasized whenever a note has been made about Valsalva. And regarding pregnancy, minimal or no medication is the key to during pregnancy. Better to treat glaucoma beforehand, before conception. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a wonderful talk. And it was very well explained through the case scenarios which you had presented. And it overemphasized the importance of taking a good history for all the residents who are attending. Good history, especially the drug history and also the sleep pattern of the patient, which we are likely to miss when we are examining a glaucoma patient. And particularly so the drug history which the patient is taking in detail. This again needs to be re-emphasized for all of us, and we need to revise that. So I would like to request Dr. Alpana Lele ma'am. She raised her hand. She has a question. I would like to take a question from her or a comment from her if she wants. Alpana ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Dr. Shalini, that was a really good presentation and
Thank you,
summed up everything very well. I was curious to know about the angle closure glaucoma studies in patients who were on topiramate or other drugs. So after the drug has been withdrawn, are there studies showing what kind of an angle these patients have? Whether they have a grade 2, grade 1 angle to begin with, because not everybody on these drugs goes into a acute angle closure. So are there any studies showing which of these patients is going into an attack?
In fact, madam, there are so many patients who are myope, who might be having wide opening of angles, and still there are cases which might go into this kind of angle closure glaucoma. And once resolved, generally they have few synechias, they have pigment dispersion of angle, which are suggestive of acute onset inflammation which has happened. So post, once this attack has resolved, generally these patients don't recover to exactly normal state of the angle what was previously. Now,
it have effects of the acute angle closure, but do we know which of these patients tends to go into an angle closure? Is there any study showing who might be susceptible to this? I don't see Shalini.
I think you lost the net connection because I can't see her on the screen. Ma'am, I think we have lost her connection. So anybody else who would want to answer this question? Dr. Shobna, ma'am, please unmute yourself. Ma'am, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to add 2 points. I don't know whether Dr. Shalini is hearing or not.
I don't think so, ma'am. She has. We have lost her right now because the connection is not showing. So,
like she has very well presented the 4 case scenarios. In the first case scenario, where she was telling that a young woman was on some antihypertensive medicines, and I think if I can recall properly, in that case, I think the intraocular pressure was in the normal range. I think so. I want to emphasize in the in such kind of cases where the patients are taking antihypertensive medicine. If suppose you have to, like Dr. Shalini has already emphasized the history of taking of use of drugs in in hypertensive patients. I want to add one point is we need to take specific history if there is a normal tension glaucoma, and because of which the glaucoma is progressing. So we need to take specific history of systemic beta blockers in such patients, because it has been seen that these systemic beta blockers leads to nocturnal ischemia of the optic nerve, and that leads to further progression of the glaucomatous damage. So if at all such kind of patient is using a systemic beta blocker, we need to stop it. That was the first case scenario. And in the second, the pregnancy scenario, the last case, I want to add one more point is, we need to, if at all we are using the anti-glaucoma drugs, we need to make sure, like she told, that we should first discuss everything with the patient, and punctal occlusion is very important to avoid any systemic absorption of the drug. And second thing is, we should preferably like use a preservative free drug. There are many drugs which have come in a preservative free form, because generally the preservative which we are using in these anti-glaucoma drugs are benzyl alkonium. So if the lady is lactating her child, so that systemic absorption of the preservative, that is BAK, will lead to bronchoconstriction in the child, the small child, the newborn child. So we need to be careful about that. And if at all we are using combination, we are using drugs, then it's better to use combination drugs, so that we can minimize the use of excessive absorption of these preservatives. So these 2 points I want to add.
okay, ma'am. Point well taken. Shalini, ma'am, we have another question from Dr. Vishal Mishra. Sir, please unmute yourself. Dr. Vishal.
We were discussing about Dr. Alpana's question. Probably there was some network
Yeah, we
issue.
missed on your connection that time.
Yeah. So actually, whenever we are talking about this effusions, ciliocoroidal effusion, which lead to this kind of angle closure glaucoma, in fact, people have given many reasons to it, that it might happen due to this, it might happen due to that. But there are no concrete study to show that, yes, these are the predisposing factors and this will happen in this particular patient only. So there are case reports which suggest, there are studies which show case series, but what are exactly the reason and why this happen in subset of patients is still a query and still not very well known.
Okay. Dr. Vishal, are you there? Dr. V.K. Mishra, sir, you also had raised a hand. If you are there, we would like to take your question for the speaker. I think we have lost the connection with them. So should we go ahead with the second talk, I think? So for the second talk, I would like to invite Dr. Monica Gupta, ma'am. She did her long-term glaucoma fellowship from Aravind Eye Hospital, Madurai, under respected Dr. Krishnadas sir's mentorage. She has trained herself at Moorfields Eye Hospital, London, and has more than 10 years experience in handling difficult and advanced glaucoma cases. She has been a speaker in many national and international conferences. So, ma'am, we welcome you all, and please go ahead with your talk. Dr. Monica, ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. You are muted.
Thank you, Jimmy. I'll share my screen.
Yes, please share your screen, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me for this meeting. Today I'll be presenting two interesting cases of angle closure glaucoma in nanophthalmos. Nanophthalmos is also known as DOR5. What is nanophthalmos? This refers to an eye that is normal in shape but small in size. They have axial length less than 20 millimeter. These eyes are prone to primary angle closure glaucoma in adulthood, and intraocular surgery should be avoided in nanophthalmic eyes unless absolutely necessary, because it can lead to disastrous complications including choroidal effusion, non-rhegmatogenous retinal detachment, cataract, and flat anterior chamber. And these patients are predisposed to malignant glaucoma. And there is no consensus about prophylactic sclerotomies. Some say this is preventive for complication if we do it before taking up surgeries in nanophthalmic eyes. So what would you expect? Small eyes in a dwarf and a big eye in a giant body. This young man presented to us with blurring of vision in both his eyes. He was a gym owner by occupation, and on refraction, his uncorrected visual acuity was 4/60 in both eyes, which improved to 6/9 partial with +12 diopter spherical glasses. Our optometrist reflexly advised for cycloplegic refraction and fundus examination. This could have been dangerous because when we did anterior segment examination on slit lamp, AC was very shallow in both eyes, and on gonioscopy, angles were occludable in all 4 quadrants. So next we got axial length done, and it was 15 millimeter in both eyes. So these were nanophthalmic eyes. So what was next? In nanophthalmic eyes, these are susceptible for angle closure glaucoma, and prophylactic YAG peripheral iridotomy is recommended. So we did peripheral iridotomy. You can see a patent PI here. And patients was advised to come for regular follow-up. This is the next case. This young girl, 20-year-old girl, she came to us with blurring of vision in her both eyes, and she gave history of some surgery in both her eyes 1 year back. This is her right eye. You can see patent PI, some signs of previous surgery, posterior synechia, anterior capsular opacities. This is left eye with bleb and patent PI. So in right eye, her visual acuity was 636 and hand movement in left eye. Intraocular pressure was 42 millimeter mercury in right eye and 14 in left eye. Fundus examination showed CD ratio 0.85 in right eye and 0.9 in left eye. Gonioscopy showed closed angles in both eyes, and CCT was 498 in right eye and 485 in left eye. Both eyes axial length was around 19 millimeter. So this was a nanophthalmic eye. So now we have a case, a young girl, one-eyed, with very high intraocular pressure, with advanced glaucomatous optic nerve head damage, and everything in a small nanophthalmic eye. So what should we plan? We cannot compromise either on efficacy or safety. We have to control pressure, but without any complications. So for both safety and efficacy, we followed Moorfield Safer Surgery System, which was devised by Professor Penty-Khaw. This system was designed to minimize the complications while maintaining a desired intraocular pressure. In this system, control of healing processes by using anti-scarring agents, that is mitomycin C, control of aqueous direction by appropriate flap construction. We stopped making few millimeters before reaching the limbus. And by control of aqueous outflow by sclerostomy and flap sutures, sclerostomy by Kelly's sponge, and by using releasable or adjustable sutures. So we planned for surgery in presence of retinal specialists to manage the complication if they occur. But fortunately, we could complete the surgery. We did a combined trabeculectomy with 2 releasable sutures. You can see 2 loops. This is temporal and nasal loops of releasable sutures. And PCIL was implanted. And after 1 week, 1 releasable suture was removed and temporal one is still there. Patient vision had improved and she was happier. And but she came back after 3 weeks and she said that there is blurring of vision. On slit lamp examination, her AC was shallow, both centrally and peripherally. So differential diagnosis of shallow AC after surgery includes malignant glaucoma, suprachoroidal hemorrhage, and pupillary block. The possibility of pupillary block was ruled out by patent PI, and possibility of suprachoroidal hemorrhage was ruled out by absence of choroidals. So this was a case of malignant glaucoma in a pseudophakic eye. Management includes topical beta blocker, topical and oral carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, hyperosmotic agents, topical steroids, and atropine. We started these also. And laser treatment include posterior capsulotomy and anterior hyalotomy. And surgical management includes pars plana vitrectomy. So there is difference in management in malignant glaucoma in phakic eye and pseudophakic eye. In phakic eye, the pars plana vitrectomy is curative, while in pseudophakic eye, in malignant glaucoma, there is sequestration of aqueous at different sites, as shown in this picture, the second one. So to eliminate these blocks, lasering has to be done through iris, posterior capsule, and highlight phase. Similar case report of malignant glaucoma in nanophthalmos, which was treated by laser peripheral posterior capsulotomy and anterior hyalotomy. And the site of laser is very important. It should be done outside the optic edge. So where do we aim? If we do laser through the central part, this PCIL act as a barrier for aqueous flow from posterior to anterior chamber and results in failure of the attempt that I had experienced earlier. But if we do laser outside the optic edge, we did laser through the surgical PI, and you can see the breach in posterior capsule. And this resulted in free flow of aqueous from posterior to anterior chamber and resulted in deepening of anterior chamber. This was before laser, the first picture, and this is after laser. This happens within few minutes of lasering. And till recent follow-up, this surgery was done in October 16, and till recent follow-up in March 2020, her AC is well formed and there is no recurrence of malignant glaucoma. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very interesting to know about nanophthalmos cases, which we are now seeing regularly, almost for our residents especially. We need to know how to diagnose the patients clinically and how to manage them as well. So ma'am, there's one question that if the patient has cataract along with angle closure presentation, can we just go ahead with cataract surgery, or we need to plan a combined surgery for every nanophthalmic patient? Because by removing the cataract, we are able to like erase the angle closure component because of the lens. So would it suffice, or we need to go with the combined surgery always?
Yeah, it is better to do a separate surgery. Mine case was different there was already previous surgery and there was synechial closure all around. So even after cataract surgery, we had to plan another glaucoma surgery. So this could have been third surgery in a narrowophthalmic eye and one-eyed patient.
Otherwise, we can go step by step, depending on the and before.
We should go for cataract surgery first and glaucoma surgery later. If a very advanced case, then vice versa can be done. If there's advanced glaucoma.
So do we have any questions from the audience, or I would like Dr. Manjula ma'am, any comments on the presentation or any questions?
Very interesting cases. And yes, we another thing that on a routine basis, I think we should be in a habit of measuring the axial length. Because on a simple examination, one cannot make out, even if it is 18 or 20, even the borderline cases. So we should make it a routine to measure the axial length by default. So I have to pick up these cases at an earlier stage.
Sure, ma'am. Dr. Vaibhav, you have something to say? Dr. Vaibhav Jain? Dr. Vaibhav, you have something to say?
Yes. I just wanted to ask, ma'am, is there any role of sclerotomy in these cases?
Yeah, actually, there is no consensus, but there is a large study conducted by Arvind Madurai that previous sclerostomy is preventive for complication in 80% of cases. So, but there is no consensus. Some advise anterior sclerostomy, some advise posterior sclerostomy, some advise one sclerostomy, some multiple sclerostomy. And I have gone through all the literatures, and even there are some videos by them that even after sclerostomy, there are certain hardening of the eye in middle of surgery, and then again pars plana vitrectomy had to be done. So we have to be very careful in these eyes.
Any precautions which we might take before planning a cataract surgery in such patients, because we have a small eye? So any tips for us if we come across such a patient?
We can do minimize the pressure during surgery as much as possible.
Mannitol, pre of mannitol.
IV mannitol. I give in fact IV mannitol in all cases before glaucoma surgery, and that should be given 1.5 hours before surgery. The effect comes after 1 hour, not before. Like if you are giving this before surgery, the effect will not be that much. And doing prayer.
Shobna, Dr. Shobna ma'am, you have something to say?
I think SICs would be more challenging in these patients as compared to fake.
Yeah, but I feel in my hands that SICS is more controlled. In PHECO, you are very much dependent on machine also.
Machine, yes.
There are studies that PHECO emulsification is safer over SICS.
SIC.
And doing sclerostomy before surgery is safer than going directly to surgery.
Yes.
So we can take one more question from Dr. Shobna Dubey. Shobna ma'am, please unmute yourself. Dr. Shobna? Please unmute yourself, ma'am.
If you are suspecting an anophthalmic eye on slit lamp, then along with the axial length, I think an ultrasound B scan should be done for these cases, because choroidal effusion and non-rhegmatogenous RD can occur either preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively as well. So if there is at all presence of choroidal effusion before surgery, then I think the retinal intervention should be done and vortex vein decompression should be done. So this is one precaution, like additional I want to.
Even now they recommend to do UBM. They say in UBM you will get to know if there is some clinical effusion there.
Yeah. What I want to put forward is that preoperatively ensure that there is no choroidal effusion preoperatively. If at all it is there, then retinal intervention has to be done preoperatively.
Yeah, we start systemic steroid and get it.
Exactly.
Dr. Monica, I congratulate you for a wonderful presentation. I was just wondering, is there any role of vitreous tap or doing a Like in phacomorphic glaucoma, people do a bit of vitrectomy and then proceed with glaucoma. So is there any such condition, any such intervention can be done to prevent post-operative malignant glaucoma in these patients?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, when I was searching literature, there was a video that cataract was removed, and just before putting IOL, there was sudden hardening of the eye. So minimal pars plana vitrectomy was done, and the eye became softer, and AC became deeper, and then IOL implantation was done. There is a very good video, in fact, of nanophthalmos, small eye and big problems. So they have given lots of cases about nanophthalmos. There is a very large study at Arvind Madurai.
Okay, so thank you all for the wonderful questions. Now we'll go ahead with the next talk. I would like to invite Dr. Shakun Gupta ma'am for her next talk, please. About from Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal, and MS from Gajraja Medical College, Gwalior. She worked at Sadguru Net Chikitsale, Chitrakoot for a year, and for 6 years, she did short-term fellowship in glaucoma from Arvind Eye Hospital, Tirunelveli, and presently she is heading the glaucoma department services at Indira Gandhi Eye Hospital, Lucknow. Shakun ma'am, over to you for your talk, please.
Screen share.
Please share your screen. Ma'am, before you start your talk, I would request everyone to please mute yourselves because we are hearing some unpleasant noise. Yeah, I would request everyone to please mute yourselves so that we can have a smooth presentation. Thank you.
Okay, Zimi?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Screen?
Yes, your screen is being shared, ma'am.
Okay. Start karo?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Today I will talk on glaucoma in microspherophagia, a case series. So starting with the case 1, 2 sisters of the age 12 and 10 years presented to us in 2009 with a complaint of diminution of vision in both eyes. On the general examination, both the sisters had short eye. They had the short and stubby fingers. Both the sisters' uncorrected visual acuity in both eyes was 360, and best corrected visual acuity in the first patient was 612 and 618 with a -15 diopter spherical and -6 and 5 diopter cylinder. And in the second patient, best corrected visual acuity by 6.6 with a -16 diopter spherical and -4 and -3.5 cylinder. That is, both the sisters had high myopia in both the eyes. On the slit lamp examination, you can see on the diffuse and slit view, there was a vulcanol-like pupil, that is, the AC was shallow centrally, but it was peripherally deep. And pressure was around 23 mm mercury in both the patients. For the bone, both the patients were very uncooperative. So we did the YAPI. Pachymetry was high in both the patients, around 600 in the first patient and 636 in the second patient. Axial length of both the patients in the both eye was around 21 mm. Post PI on dilating pupil, you can see there is a microspheric lens. Zonules can be seen through the dilated pupil. Iridodonesis and mild phacodonesis was present. This is a photo of the first patient and this is the photo of the second patient. This was within normal limit in both the patients and there was no treatable lesion in the fundus found on IO. So we diagnosed the case as a Weil-Marchesani syndrome. The points in favor of this are short height, short and stubby fingers, and microspherophagia. So we kept these patients in the follow-up. In the follow-up, their IOP raised up to 22, 28, and 34. So we started the anti-glaucoma medications in these patients. Second patient had some heart, so we started the dorzolamide in that patient. And we modified the AGM as per their IOP and field in the follow-up. After 10 years now, from the first visit, their IOP is well controlled and their fields are within normal limit. This is the fields done in the 2018 of the first patient, and in the second patient is almost within normal limit. So the points to be remembered from this case, that microspheric patients can have the volcano-like pupil, that is, their AC can be shallow centrally and the peripheral deep. And this occurs because of the pupillary block due to microspheric lens. Gonio should be done very carefully in these cases, as the gonios can be weak in these cases. Phacodonosis may and may not be present. The myopia is occurring in these patients because of the spherical lens. Axial length, it may or may not be increased. In these patients which have the good visual potential, we should do the PI and should keep patient under observation with anti-glaucoma medications. Coming to the case 2, an 18-year-old male presented to us in 2014, and he has a complaint of diminution of vision since childhood, and he came to us for the LASIK surgery. His uncorrected visual acuity in the both eye was 160, and best corrected visual acuity in the right eye was 660, and in the left eye 612, with a -16 diopter and -18 diopter spherical lens. That is myopia in both the eyes. On the slit lamp examination, AC was deep, iridotonosis was present, reaction to light was sluggish, and microspheric and microdonosis was present. On the gonioscopy, it shows an open angle with subnublumental angle anomaly, abnormally high and insertion of the eyes covering the square spot. On the fundus examination, both the eyes shows a 0.8 to 0.85 cupping with a bipolar rim thin. There was no any treatable lesions found in the fundus on IO. Axial length was increased about 27.5 millimeter in both the eyes, and the IOP was 39 and 40 the right and left eye. Pachymetry was 518, and average arterial thickness was thin in the 50 micron in the right and the left eye 45 micron. Tendency to field shows advanced field effect in both the eyes. So we started the anti-glaucoma medication in these patients. All the anti-glaucoma medications we have started is modified as per the change in IOP. All the AGM we had started, but target IOP cannot be achieved even with the maximum AGM. So I plan to do the lens extraction with SFIL in the trab in the right eye. But on the OT table, I was able to make the capsulorhexis. So I changed the decision on the OT table and I did SSCS and implanted the acrylic foldable ion, having a power of 13 diopter in the bag, and trab is done without MMC in December 2015. This realized me that I can do phaco also in microspheric lens. So in the left eye, I did phaco with acrylic foldable ion, having a power 13 diopter in the bag, and trab without MMC in February 2016. So the course of 6 weeks, ECL was well placed in position with blab in both the patients, and best corrected visual acuity was 618 in the right eye with a plus 1.25 diopter spherical and -2 cylinder, and in the left eye it was 69 best corrected visual acuity with a plus 0.5 diopter spherical and -1 cylinder. Course of 5 months, in the left eye the PCL was well placed in position and the bleb was present, but in the right eye PCL was slightly decentered inferiorly, but it was in the pupillary axis and the bleb was present. 1.5 year post of surgery, when the patients came to us, he gave us the history of the fall from the bike, and vision in the right eye was decreased with 636 with 0.9, 636 with plus 9 diopter spherical lens. As PCI was not in the pupillary axis. So the retina department did the B scan and they advised the IOL removal with STOL, but patient did not want this surgery. In the 3 to 4 to 5 years, 4.5 years post surgery, in the left eye the PCL is well placed and the bleb is present, and his visual acuity in the last follow-up was 6.6 in the left eye with a 0.5 diopter spherical and plus 1 diopter cylinder. And left eye IOP is also controlled 12 mm mercury with a fixed dose combination of bimetoprost and timolol. So the points to be remembered from this case: though the phacodonosis can present, gonios can be weak, but sometimes gonios can be strong enough that you can perform the SSCS and phaco with a foldable ion. Bag is usually small in this microspheric cases, but the foldable ion can accommodate in the bag due to the flexible haptics. You should always keep the patient in the follow-up, and PCL can subluxate or dislocate at any time after surgery because of the weak gonios, and also these patients are more susceptible to trauma. In the case 3, a 16-year male presented to us in 2013 with a complaint of diminution of vision and floater. His uncorrected visual acuity in the both eye was, counting figure 1 foot, and best corrected visual acuity was 618 in the both eye with -25 diopter and 24 diopter is a very high myopic. On the slit lamp examination, anterior chamber depth was normal, iridotonosis was present, the HMP is sluggish, microspheric lens with phacotonosis is normal. IOP was in the right eye is for 28 millimeter mercury and in the left eye is for 36 millimeter mercury with a 586 and 598 micron tachymetry. Conoscopy open angle with some developmental anomaly. In the fundus examination, the CT ratio was 0.9 with the bipolar rim loss. On IO, the retinal periphery was within normal limit. Axial length was around 25 millimeter in both the eyes. 10-2 field of the patient shows the advanced glaucomatous field defect. So we started the anti-glaucoma medications in the patient and started with the steps in both the eye as a fixed dose combination, and we kept the patient in the regular follow-up. But 5 months after the first visit in December 2013, the patients came to us with his lens dislocated in anterior chamber. A part of the lens was touching the cornea. So in the IOP was controlled 16 with all the AGM in the both eye. So I plan to do the lens removal with trap surgery only, with trap in triangular trap only, as SFL and STL was advised to avoid by the retina department in view of the future RD. So, but I did only traps only and didn't do the lens removal because before the surgery the lens displaced in the vitreous before the surgery, and post of the IOP was 40 millimeter. As the lens capsule was intact, so no intervention was planned by the retina department and we left the lens as such in the, intact in the vitreous. But post surgery at the 3rd month, when the patients came to us, his lens again collapsed from the vitreous in the anterior chamber. Then I did the lens removal and with no iode, left a faking. In the post of 6 weeks, his best corrected visual acuity in the left eye was 618 with a 9 diopter spherical and plus 1.5 diopter cylinder, and pressure was 13 without any anti-glaucoma medications. So we prescribed the glasses to the left eye. We kept the patient in follow-up. Right eye, there was phacotonosis with inferior subluxation, pressure was controlled, but patient was not ready for the surgery in the right eye. Patients again came to us 3 years, we kept in the follow-up, but the 3 years post-surgery, his right eye lens dislocated in anterior chamber with a lenticulocorneal touch and gap was 28 millimeter. So I plan to do the lens removal with trap surgery at the DVP. But again, before the block, the lens dislocated in vitreous. So later, the retina department did the trans-pars granulopatectomy and lensectomy. So post of 6 weeks, vision in the right eye was 612 with a plus 9 diopter spherical. And the pressure was 14 with all the 4 topical anti-glaucoma medications. And 5 years post-surgery, his both eyes are phakic and blood is present in the left eye. And vision with the glasses is 624 in the right eye and 612 in the left eye. Pressure was controlled in the left eye, it was 10 millimeter mercury without anti-glaucoma medications, and in the right eye 13 with all the 4 anti-glaucoma medications. So the points to be remembered from this case, sometimes in microspheric lens, it may subluxate or dislocate in the anterior to posterior segment. So in these situations, the lens extraction with SFIL or STIL, or we have to leave the patient to aphaky, it can be planned after the retina opinion. Trap may or may not be done depending on the glaucomatous status. Pilocarpine should be used to constrict the pupil once the lens is in the AC to prevent it to dislocate in vitreous. So coming to the discussion, microspheric, it is a rare bilateral congenital anomaly of the crystalline lens, where in the anterior posterior diameter is more than the horizontal diameter and lens assumes a spherical shape. Entire lens equity can be visualized as the slit lamp when the pupil is dilated. In the pathogenesis, there is a faulty development of the secondary lens fibers during abrogenesis at the 5th and 6th month of the intraocular life, and defective development of the tonules results in their deficiency, their increased length, weakness, and non-attachment of the posterior tonules to the ciliary process. It is hypothesized that incompletely developed ciliary body and its loose tonules, they do not exert the sufficient pressure so as to cause flattening of the developing lens. So the lenses therefore retain their fetal spherical conformation. It may occur as an isolated defect of the familial hereditary abnormality. It may occur associated with a systemic and local abnormality with the Weil-Marchesani syndrome, Marfan's, and etc. So for the diagnosis, you have to completely take the family history, systemic anomalies. Patients usually come to us with a diminution of vision and acute eye pain. Classically, triad of the microspheric is the angle closure glaucoma, shallow anterior chamber, and the refractive myopia. Other findings, you will find the thick crystalline lens and lens margin can be seen through the full dilated pupil. You can see the posterior staphyloma, myopic crescent, ectopic pupil, blue sclera, and other ectopic lentis, glaucoma, and high myopia. So what happens, the spherical shape of this lens is mainly responsible, is causing the increasing refractive power. And this is responsible for causing hypomyopia. Yet progressive microsphericalcia, it mainly responsible for severe and progressive lenticular myopia, while jonular instability, it might lead to lens dislocation or subluxation. Now about the glaucoma in microsphericalcia, it's a common complication. It is reported in up to 51% of the patients. Secondary angle closure coma is the most common sight-threatening complication of microsphericalcia. It can be caused because of the acute pupillary block. This acute pupillary block is caused because of the forward movement of the spherical lens or anterior subluxation of the lens due to weak and long. It can be occurred because of the peripheral synechial formation because of unrelieved pupillary block, causing synechial angle closure and irreversible trabecular mesh damage. Chronic pupillary block leading to the crowding of the anterior chamber angle by the spherical lens, developmental anomaly of the anterior chamber end, and the probability of developing the glaucoma increases with age for the patients with microsphericalcia. So myotics are contraindicated in these conditions because it aggravates this condition by increasing the pupillary block and allowing the further lens displacement. Cycloplegics, they are the medical treatment of choice to break an attack of angle closure in these cases, as is decreasing the pupillary block by tightening the jonular fibers and decreasing the anterior posterior diameter and pulling the lens posteriorly. But cycloplegics is also have to be given very carefully, because if the lens with the jonules, if the jonules will be weak, the lens can subluxate anteriorly or posteriorly. And laser iridotomy may also be useful in relieving the angle closure in patients with microsphericalcia. So for what are the indications here? You can do the surgery if the patient have cataract, patients have the corneal lenticular touch, patients have the myopia, unilateral, intermittent pupillary block, and secondary glaucoma. So for the management, PI can be done so as to break or to prevent the pupillary block, agent to control the IOP, myotics and mediatic to be given very carefully. Surgical intervention can be done lens extraction alone, lens extraction with or without the SFL or STIOL, cataract extraction with foldable IOL, trab or the shunt for glaucoma. So literature search has revealed that there are the only few case reports where the clear lens phacoemulsification was done with an appropriate IOL implantation and with excellent post-operative visual recovery. There is a video present in the YouTube of Dr. Manas Nath. He has loaded that video 1 year back of the phaco in microsphericalcia. I saw that video 2 days back. In that video, he has used the iris hook, CTR, special capsular tension ring to fix the bag. I had not used any of these in my cases, but it is better. One can see that video and can learn from there, and it is better to fix the bag. Intraoperative difficulty that is associated with the clear lens extraction in these patients include difficulty. There is a difficulty can be occur in the performing capsulorhexis and implanting IOL due to smaller bag size, but both are possible. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was wonderful and very interesting to see you managing the cases so well, especially the jumping lens which was happening in the third case, but you managed it well as usual. Ma'am, I have a question that if the patient has been diagnosed to be having spherophakia, but he's not having any glaucoma, or he's not having any kind of symptoms of glaucoma and any optic disc damage, should we go ahead with the prophylactic PI in such cases, or just observe the patient and keep him in follow-up? Sorry?
Prophylactic PI can be done. Prophylactic PI can be done.
Okay. So what will be the settings? Because as we know, the zonules are weak. So what settings do you keep for PI in such patients? Are the regular settings or there is a change in the settings which we use?
No, low power. You can use the low power.
Okay.
Use the low power.
Okay. Dr. Bhaskar sir, any comments on the presentation? Dr. Bhaskar sir? Dr. Shobna ma'am?
I just want to ask a very basic question. I mean, this is for the residents I'm asking. That you said that you will be doing a peripheral iridotomy, but myotics are not given. So how do you proceed with that? Just for the residents, for the sake of residents, I'm asking. Hello, Shakun, can you hear me?
Shakun ma'am, are you able to hear the question?
I can hear this question. Even in the normal,
For residents, I'm asking so that they should, because generally when you're doing peripheral iridotomy, we'll be giving.
Even in the normal people, we can do the PI.
Ma'am, it would be difficult because we're having a very weak, small spherical lens and the zonules are already compromised. So it will take some expertise in doing that, I think. Dr. Bhaskar sir, any questions or any comments, sir?
It was nice thinking of these cases, and they manage nicely there. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir. So please go ahead.
Okay, a very nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Do we, or we proceed for the next presentation? Alpna, ma'am. Okay. So we'll proceed with the next presentation. I would like to welcome Dr. Rajat Mohan. He's an assistant professor in ophthalmology at KGMU and is the co-in charge of glaucoma subspecialty. He did his MS from AIMS New Delhi and is a faculty for AIOS PG teaching and Young Ophthalmic Society of India. So Rajat, it's good to have you around and please go ahead with your talk.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good evening to all of you. To begin with, at the outset, I would like to thank the Lucknow Ophthalmology Society for giving me this opportunity to express my thoughts on challenges we encounter in managing pediatric glaucoma. And the way I have made this talk is that instead of talking about a few specific changes, I'll be giving you all an overview of all the kind of challenges which we may come across while we manage these cases of pediatric glaucoma. So to begin with, let me show you.
Yeah, you need to share your screen.
Yeah,
share your screen. Yeah.
Okay, just a minute. Is it not shared yet?
No, not as yet.
Okay. Just a moment, please. Sorry.
Yeah, now you're on.
Sorry for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to say that I would be discussing the challenges which we face routinely, not a specific challenge, but an overview of all the kind of challenges we face in managing such cases. So I was going to start off with this interesting photograph which shows Swayamvar from great Mahabharata. Now the challenge here is somewhat an approximation to the kind of challenges which we face while we manage pediatric glaucoma. Now I say an approximation because unlike the challenge, here managing pediatric glaucoma actually surpasses the ability of a single practitioner and usually is dependent upon the collective and dedicated effort on a group of doctors. And unlike this Swayamvar, which ended with hitting Sabulai, most of the time for us, while managing, the challenge begins with one bullseye. So the kind of challenges that we face, they are multifaceted. And for the purpose of this talk, I have classified these, categorized these challenges into those which we encounter while managing the clinical part of it, the rehabilitation part of this, some which we have because of the healthcare delivery system, and finally the social challenges which we face while managing pediatric glaucoma cases. In general, managing pediatric glaucoma is very challenging. That is because the stakes involved in management are very, very high. On one side, we have a lifelong curse of blindness in a child. And on the other side, we have, the gift of sight. So the stakes are very high and that makes the glaucoma management in pediatric cases even more challenging. So one of the earliest, the challenge which we face in managing these pediatric glaucoma is to ensure a timely diagnosis so that we can have a timely intervention. We all know that there is a classical triad of specific symptoms and signs for picking up these congenital glaucoma cases. But sometimes, in spite of all that, picking up a congenital glaucoma may become a tricky situation, especially when you have megalocornea and other situations. So what happens that with delay of diagnosis, we all know that there is a buildup of intraocular pressure, which causes enlargement of the eyeball, and then thinning of the limbus, altering of the limbar anatomy, and eventual corneal damage and corneal opacities. With each delay, these complications develop and the prognosis in these children become really, really bad. Even the surgery in these situations become difficult and become complicated. So time is precious in these children, and we must strive to identify these cases as early as possible with other differential which may be present. Apart from the issue of timely diagnosis, we must also realize that an important challenge while managing these pediatric cases that they may often be associated with comorbidities. These may be systemic or may be ocular. So now what the challenge is that we need to keep these children under monitoring on a very regular basis and look out for the earliest sign of development of glaucoma. And that is the time when we have to actively intervene so as to prevent them from progressing further and worsen their prognosis. Now, ocular trauma is one of the common causes of secondary glaucomas in pediatric population. And often we see that once a child undergoes a corneal perforation repair with lens removal, glaucoma is out of the picture. People are not able to actually identify glaucoma in these patients. So the diagnosis is either not made or is actually delayed for a very long period of time, especially in pediatric cases. Now, an important reason for such a delay of diagnosis in glaucoma or diagnosis of glaucoma in pediatric cases is because the process of making a diagnosis in children is very, very painstaking. Unlike adult glaucoma, we have got where we have got specific tools. All the tools which we use in adult glaucoma, they have got limited utility when it comes to pediatric population. I mean, the objectivity of having a retinal fiber layer assessment, which is OCT based, or having a good perimetry to diagnose and assess prognosis, all these things have got very, very limited role in pediatric glaucoma. So here, most of the time, when we are making a diagnosis of pediatric glaucoma, we are mainly dependent upon our clinical experience. And what we try to aim at is that in very young children, we try to get an assessment of the intraocular pressure, the axial length, corneal diameters, and also observe the optic nerve, how it is. But again, the challenge is in pediatric cases, making those simple assessment like intraocular pressure also is very, very challenging in pediatric cases. First of all, children won't be cooperative at all. And so we will need multiple EUAs. Now, when it comes to having an examination under anesthesia, often we come across fitness issues related to anesthesia. And again, GAOT time is very limited. Now, fitness issues with reduced GAOT time is another challenge which actually hampers the management of these patients. Often there is delay in diagnosis, delay in intervention, and we know time is precious. So this is yet another challenge which we routinely encounter in management, and that actually worsens the prognosis. Now, even if we do an examination, even if we happen to get to do an examination under anesthesia, what we are mainly dealing with, we try to get an objective assessment of the intraocular pressure. But again, we know that there are issues related to the accurate assessment of the intraocular pressure, maybe because of the anesthesia related issues, or sometimes we don't have the right instrument for measuring it. Schios tonometer, which is widely available, is highly unreliable. And then Perkins, somewhere it is useful, but rebound tonometer has been found to have a greater utility, but it has got a very limited availability. It has been said that when we do examination under anesthesia, we can do routine axial length monitoring, but that again is a big challenge. I mean, not too many OTs are available which have got a ultrasound available to do per op axial length measurement so as to have an objective assessment. And so finally, what we can do is, even under anesthesia, is just to examine the optic nerve head and look out for whether there is glaucoma or not, and then subsequently look out for any progression. I hope I'm audible, ma'am. Is it okay? Am I audible? Is it okay? All right. So while doing, okay, so even while doing examination under anesthesia, one of the most reliable factor which we come across is having a look at the optic nerve head. Now the challenge is that in spite of looking at it, the evaluation itself is very subjective. What I may feel as a glaucomatous disc may not be the same for somebody else at times. And then to look out for small changes in subsequent EUAs again is a very subjective course. So the overall diagnosis in these children becomes a very tedious part and at times a big challenge. I mean, even if we have to find an alternative to an examination under anesthesia, it has been said that, okay, we can do examination of these children while they are sleeping. But believe me, it is far more easier said than actually done. You never know when the child is going to awaken up and he is going to or she is going to just make you abandon all your examination. And you cannot make a diagnosis, a clear-cut diagnosis or document a progression just by doing this examination. A diligent and patient examination while the child is sleeping is like very difficult, because you never know when the child is going to say, okay, I'm done with it. So we see that in pediatric glaucoma, diagnosing and evaluation is a huge challenge, which we keep coming across on a very routine basis. The thing is, most of the pediatric glaucoma patients which we come across, they eventually require to undergo surgery, especially glaucoma surgery, sometime in the course. We need to understand that because of altered anatomy of the limbus, surgery in glaucoma patient is not similar to that which we see in adult. These surgeries are much more difficult. The elasticity of the tissue is different. And these surgeries are more prone to have complication. And we also observed that there is a robust healing response by conjunctiva in these children. So all these factors, they result in a very high rate of failure of glaucoma surgery in pediatric population. And as a result, pediatric population especially required to have multiple surgeries when it comes to management of glaucoma, more than the adult one. And add to that, there are specific surgical procedures, specific additional skills which one must have, like goniotomy and trabeculotomy. Most of us, it happens so that people who are managing adult glaucoma may not have the adequate expertise in doing goniotomy or doing a trabeculotomy on a routine basis. So when it comes to managing pediatric glaucoma, there is a challenge that we need to develop these additional new set of skills so that we can do the best for these patients when it comes to glaucoma surgery. I mean, apart from surgery, the walls can also be done, but yes, those are additional skills which would be required, and that itself is a challenge in managing. Now, glaucoma can be quite engrossing by, we all might get engrossed with controlling the intraocular pressure most of the time. But we must not forget that the eventual goal of managing pediatric glaucoma is to ensure visual rehabilitation. Okay. And often what happens, we overlook so many other factors. It is important that in these children especially, we address the issues like ametropia, amblyopia, cataract-related changes, or even corneal issues in these patients. And it is essential that we address these issues in a timely manner so that we can provide the best possible visual outcome these children may have. We have seen that pediatric glaucoma cases may have systemic comorbidities associated with them. So it is important that we also have a multidisciplinary approach while managing these patients. There is a continuous interaction of the doctors with the patient so that every small little care can be provided to these children so that they have best outcome. And often rehabilitation is a lifelong process and we have to be involved with it. Now, if we want to have a holistic rehabilitation program for pediatric glaucoma patient, it is a humongous task. And it is one of the biggest challenges which we face while managing these patients. Unfortunately, there is a glaring lack of, equipped healthcare infrastructure for managing these patients. We even don't have, well-trained healthcare personnel, especially managing pediatric glaucoma. The residency program which we have as of now mainly caters with management of cataract and related issues. And even the glaucoma courses which are available somewhere mainly deal with the other glaucoma management. There are very few which actually makes you trained for managing pediatric glaucoma specifically. There is a lack of well-defined protocols which need to be followed whenever we come across a pediatric glaucoma patient. We don't have those protocols like when should we define a glaucoma in these children? IOP is not the factor, axial length is a factor, other things. So they have to be well-defined factors, which unfortunately we don't have. We need to have we need to have a center which can have a holistic view for management of these patients, which we don't have as of now. So developing such healthcare system for proper management of glaucoma cases, pediatric children is a big challenge, which will not only require a lot of efforts from us, that is doctors, but will also require a huge political will so that we have those centers developed. And now, when we are talking of healthcare system, it is important that we also need to address the issues which are related to the social angle of pediatric glaucoma. Now, you see, all of us know that in general there is a lack of awareness regarding glaucoma in general population, and add to that there are some who seek for treatment in pediatric cases. Now, those who seek treatment, they are overburdened by the expenses, the medical expenses they have, the recurring cost of the treatment, and the very long follow-up they have. And to make the situation more complicated, the thing is there are very few centers who are actually managing pediatric glaucoma, and they are few and far. So assessing the accessibility to a proper healthcare system for management of these for pediatric glaucoma is a very big social challenge. We know that even if we happen to provide the best of medical facility for management of pediatric glaucoma, poor compliance can severely affect the outcome. It can make the outcome worse in spite of the best efforts which we put in. So we see from a social point of view, a motivated society and a good doctor-patient interaction is a must. And if it isn't there, then management of pediatric glaucoma may be just like a lost cause. So to summarize, managing pediatric glaucoma can be an uphill task. For most of us managing pediatric glaucoma, it is going to be a long and anxious journey. It will require a lot of effort from our side to deliver those results. And at the same time, what we see how the outcome is going to be, it is highly unreliable. We don't know, in spite of the best effort, whether are we able to achieve that or not. And when we look at all these factors together, what we realize is that we start wondering whether are all these efforts which we are putting in managing pediatric glaucoma, is it actually worth it or not? I mean, is it really worth it? And that is what I believe is the biggest challenge in managing pediatric glaucoma. We as an ophthalmologist, are we up to this challenge of managing pediatric glaucoma or not? Because it is us who need to take decision, who need to overcome all these challenges. Only then can we beat this problem and can secure that gift of sight for these children with pediatric glaucoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajat, for highlighting the various challenges in management of pediatric glaucoma. I'm sure that we all agree to it, that it is a very difficult task to diagnose first of all, and then treat the patient, because the patient is not an adult, he's a child. Yeah. And they have so many, associated things which we are not able to comprehend when we are actually managing the patient. So what about the surgeries? Like, do you plan regular surgeries for after the EUAs, and which surgery do you prefer, and do you use mitomycin? What is your experience of using mitomycin in pediatric patients, if any?
Yeah, I have. Actually, the thing is, as far as surgery is considered, as I told you, most of the time, because we are a tertiary care center, the kind of cases which we get are very easy to diagnose. Okay, this is a pediatric glaucoma. It cannot be controlled on medication. The child needs to undergo surgery. So most of the time, EUA surgery is planned on a routine basis. Now, whether we are using mitomycin or not, my personal choice has always been on assessing how the limbus is, how the sclera is. If I believe that there is a lot of thinning, then I am a little worried for using mitomycin. But if the limbus looks good enough for me, then I do use mitomycin. I use a lesser concentration. I go for about 0.2. I also reduce the duration of application. I have been guided for the use of Olugen in these patients for for modeling for preventing scarring in these patients. So that can also be used in these patients for preventing scarring. The commonest surgery, as you asked me, which I use, trab on trab. I mean, trabeculotomy with trabeculectomy is what I believe, is the commonest which I use. Sometimes they are, when I'm not able to locate the Schlemm's canal and I'm not able to open them, then it just remains a trabeculectomy in those cases. And as far as releasable sutures are concerned, I have not been using releasable suture in pediatric cases especially. But somehow I do titrate them on table, and it has gone fine up till now. So I don't have much experience of having releasable suture in pediatric cases, but yes, other things definitely.
We have another question from Dr. Amit Yadav. Which anti-glaucoma medication would be safe according to you in pediatric and infantile glaucoma cases? Which do you prefer? Which is the drop you prefer?
There isn't anything like preference. The best thing is if you can have 0.25% timolol, which is the safest, which can be the safest in these. But then again, what you rely upon is diluting them and asking these patients to give. Brinzolamide is another medication which I find to be useful. I don't go for prostaglandin analog, especially in children, because in spite of no matter what instruction I give to the parents, these children, they come up with some kind of periocular dermatitis, and even the response isn't too much, and it is difficult to see that child. See, if you start the child on prostaglandin analog, sometimes there is so much of ocular irritation that the next time when the child comes, you don't realize the inflammation which you are seeing is because of the drug, or has there been progression of the disease.
It leads to the lower compliance also by the patient and the parents, of course. So, they are bothered about
As far as compliance is considered, I have had best experience using timolol and brinzolamide more than dorzolamide.
Okay.
At least with prostaglandin. But when I tell these children that okay, this is, and in prostaglandin log, I prefer to use latanoprost in these children. Okay. Because that somehow, though I have not compared them, which one of them works best, but then it has been I have been using only latanoprost in children. So maybe bimetopros LS could have helped, but I don't have much experience with that drug in management of pediatric cases.
So Dr. Vaibhav Jain, please, would you like to comment? Please unmute yourself.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Raja, by which technique you prefer measuring intraocular pressure in these children or infantile, in primary infantile glaucoma?
If I am doing a UA, I always prefer Perkins for measuring intraocular pressure. And if I'm doing it in OPD setting and the child is really small, then I just ask the mother to hold the child, and we have got Rebound with us. Rebound does it for us. If we do it little patiently, we do get properly. And for intraocular, when we are doing EUA, then Perkins is used, and we are using LMAs. So laryngeal mass airways, they don't really cause that initial rise in intraocular pressure. And so Perkins with LMA serve the purpose for checking intraocular pressure in these cases.
Just in case there's another question, if first TRAB has failed, so what would be the choice of second surgery, the timing and the choice?
Okay, what I have done personally is that I never do a central TRAB in any of the children. I prefer to do it either temporally or nasally, so that I have another chance available for it. And my preference is that I always go for a second TRAB again if there is a site available before thinking for a valve procedure for these children.
Okay.
So a second TRAB, first I try to do some needling, see what the problem is there with the primary TRAB. If there isn't anything and it just fails, where I'm not able to understand exactly, because getting a gonioscopy done again is a problem in these children, because sometimes because of various issues, because of the corneal issues, again, the angle structure viewing becomes a little difficult. And so you really don't know if there is a problem with the ostium, why has the surgery failed in the first place? Sometimes we don't understand. and there isn't much of a fibrosis which I can see, then I prefer to go with another side trabeculectomy.
So what will be the minimum gap for the second glaucoma surgery in case your first TAV on TAV is failed?
I wait for at least 3 months.
3 months.
3 months. I give it 3 months, use medication, try to do some massaging here and there. In US, you get an idea how it is.
That thing which is already there, so we don't have to interfere again. So Ahmed valve glaucoma, any experience you have in children or in like?
I have not personally implanted any valve as of now, but so personal experience I cannot really comment upon valve.
And for needling, you're using 5FU or using mitomycin along with just needling?
I prefer only needling without using mitomycin.
Without any antifibrotic agent.
Yeah,
Okay.
or a 5FU.
Okay.
Because many just needling, it does work at times without using an antifibrotic. But if we use antifibrotic, yeah, 5FU has been used. My training told me about 5FU at a site 6 hours away is good enough. Yeah. But what I've been practicing on my own is just doing simple needling, and many times they do work. In adults, I feel a little more confident with mitomycin injected needling compared to children.
Okay. So Dr. Bhaskar, do you have any comments on the presentation?
Yes, yes, it was very nice here. The children are really difficult to manage, these glaucoma patients. Am I audible? Can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
You're audible. You're audible, sir. You're audible,
okay.
Sir.
So we have to manage a patient in a different way. What I do is, if any adult patient with glaucoma, I always them siblings or the small or grandchildren, they should be examined. So we can pick up this glaucoma at the early what it is, what it is. Just to them get an eye, excellent, and most of them they get their children or grandchildren screened.
Okay, sir. So there's an open question for everyone. What is the experience, if anyone has, of Ologen, if the patient can afford? Should we go ahead and if anybody has tried Ologen in such glaucoma, infantile glaucoma patients or?
Yes, I've tried 3 cases and it's very good. IOP is very low. I mean, it's been till I've got a follow-up for 3 years. Pressure is still maintained. But not much. 3 or 4 cases I've done.
I've used Ologen in adult patients, but I've never used in pediatric patients. And what I feel that Ologen and mitomycin C has almost similar kind of result. I mean, I did not find any added advantage of Ologen over mitomycin C. But in pediatric glaucoma, as already the sclera is thinned out and we want to avoid mitomycin C and maybe we use a lesser concentration, so that could give an edge over mitomycin C in cases of pediatric.
That's what my point was of using mitomycin. Should we use it, or if yes, then judicially, and what is the concentration? So Ologen, as you are saying, is a better option. We can consider.
Yeah, because a few of the studies also quote that it can be used more conclusively in cases of pediatric glaucoma because of thinner sclera. And I would congratulate Dr. Rajat for an excellent talk. It was a very comprehensive one. And as we were discussing about medical management, as Dr. Rajat very rightly pointed out that timolol 0.25% is the ideal choice in such a scenario. But I would like to emphasize one more thing, that in congenital glaucoma, pediatric glaucoma, the ultimate answer is the surgery only. So suppose we are adding these medications, it is just for tide over the crisis situation and to prepare the child for the surgery. So initially we add timolol and then obviously carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. So I have similar experience with both dorzolamide and brinzolamide. Regarding prostaglandin analogs, I would slightly differ from Dr. Rajat, because generally the children, they don't respond very good to these prostaglandin analogs, and in fact many times they are non-responsive also. So I actually avoid prostaglandin in children, but timolol and dorzolamide are the ideal choice. Dorzolamide or brinzolamide are the ideal choice in pediatric glaucoma. Now, there was one more question about hemangioblastoma valve in children. So, primary hemangioblastoma valve I have done in a child, in a patient of Sturge-Weber syndrome. And in fact, it did very well and child is doing very well. But in congenital glaucoma, like these cases of Booth-Elmos, I think as Dr. Rajat very nicely pointed out that the trabeculotomy works very well. And we can easily continue with this gold standard surgery in these pediatric patients.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you all of you for excellent presentations, as well as the beautiful audience which was here to encourage all of us. And now I would like to hand over my mic to Dr. Rajesh Sahai, sir. So please, if you could just have some closing remarks for the meeting.
Excellent, Jimmy. You organized it so well, and all talks were so enriching. Rajat's talk was wonderful, and of course, our superstar was there for all her comments and her experiences. It was wonderful all the way. I appreciate everyone and all the participants.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Udham Singh, on behalf of Sun Pharma, who helped us organize all these events. And thank you very much, all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Wonderful.
Bye, everyone. Good presentations.
Thank you. Bye.
Interesting
Thank you so
discussion.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night. Good night.